The Florida Straits, just off the southern tip of Florida. The Gulf Stream shimmered under a brutal sun, tossing Kptlt, Herbert Werner's U-230 on gentle swells. Werner, a seasoned Kriegsmarine U-boat commander, leaned over the conning tower, squinting at the horizon. The ocean glistened like molten metal, deceptively calm, a silent accomplice to the war raging beneath its surface. Werner's crew went about their routines with a professional monotony born of months at sea. The diesel engines hummed below decks, a constant reminder of their dependence on machinery. Every few minutes, a lookout's whistle would slice through the humid air, a sharp punctuation against the lazy rhythm of waves. Werner's hands rested lightly on the railing, yet his eyes were alert, scanning the sky. He had seen many aircraft in his career, but nothing that demanded immediate concern, certainly nothing as laughable as the flying gas bags drifting in the distance. Far above, K-class Blimp K-74 bobbed against the clouds like a massive, slow-moving jellyfish. Lieutenant Nelson Grills peered through his plexiglass nose cone, eyes locked on the sleek gray shape of U-230 below. The Blimp swayed with the wind, engines whining, a hulking sentinel in the sky. Its crew was tense, fingers brushing over the controls and the depth charge release mechanisms beneath the belly of the airship. They knew the stakes. German U-boats had terrorized Allied shipping for years, and every patrol carried the possibility of a decisive encounter. Werner's laughter echoed across the deck, a casual, almost mocking sound as he gestured toward the Blimp. "Flying balloons, that's all," he told his first watch officer. "Nothing to worry about." But as K-74's radar blinked insistently, a subtle shift passed through Werner. The hum of engines and the splash of waves against the hull suddenly seemed louder, more menacing. His instincts, honed from countless patrols in the Atlantic, whispered a warning. The Blimp descended, slow but purposeful, banking slightly to line up its attack vector. Lieutenant Nelson Grill's knuckles whitened around the control yoke. The Florida sun glinted off the metal of the depth charges, 7 of them arranged meticulously for a pattern designed to smash steel and shatter nerves alike. The wind buffeted the airship, and he could feel every ripple and sway, each gust threatening to throw off the delicate calculation of trajectory. Below, U-230's crew remained unaware of the precise danger closing above them. They went about cleaning the deck, checking lines, and adjusting hatches, oblivious to the fact that the air war had finally arrived at their doorstep in a form they had always underestimated. The smell of diesel, salt, and sweat hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint ozone smell of the Blimp's electrical systems. Then, with a sudden, almost imperceptible shift, the Blimp's radar locked fully onto U-230. A quiet alarm blinked on Lieutenant Grill's console. He took a deep breath, the tension coiling in his stomach, and prepared to dive through the flak-filled sky. Every second stretched, taut with anticipation, the calm before a storm no one could predict. Werner glanced skyward again, squinting, noting the odd shape drifting above. His smile faltered. Something was wrong. The laughter that had been his shield against fear and uncertainty waned replaced by a sharp, slicing awareness that perhaps this gas bag was something entirely different, something deadly. The ocean no longer seemed forgiving. Every wave now looked like a potential trap. The moment hung like a suspended breath. Above, K-74 made its move. Lieutenant Grills tilted the nose, maneuvering through the invisible web of anti-aircraft fire that would soon rain from U-230's deck. Below, the crew began to sense an unseen tension, a change in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. The hunt was about to become a deadly confrontation, a clash between the silent predator beneath the waves and the floating hunter above. The sky seemed to tighten as K-74 dropped lower, engines whining against the thickening Florida air. Lieutenant Nelson Grill's eyes were locked on U-230, his body leaning into the controls, every muscle taut with the precision of years of training. He could feel the subtle shift in wind currents, the way the sun glared off the waves, and he adjusted accordingly, compensating for the tiny deflections that could turn a perfectly laid depth charge pattern into a useless scatter. Below, Werner barked orders, his voice slicing through the rising tension like a whip. "All stations, man your posts, anti-aircraft ready." The crew scrambled, a practiced machine of urgency and fear. Machine guns rotated, rounds clicked into place, and hatches were secured with hasty efficiency. Werner's eyes never left the blimp now, scanning its slow, purposeful descent. Something in its methodical approach unsettled him. The flying gas bag had become a predator. K-74 shuddered slightly as it adjusted its altitude, flak whistling past its sides. Grills's co-pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Harper, leaned over, gripping the bulkhead for support. "Sir, they've spotted us. Flak incoming." The first bursts of anti-aircraft fire shredded the air, a staccato of sparks and smoke. Grills nodded, fingers tightening on the release controls. Timing was everything. One misstep, and the blimp could be shredded to fragments before the bombs even touched the water. Werner's crew fired relentlessly. Tracers zigzagged through the sunlight, carving arcs of red and white toward the slowly advancing blimp. The deck of U-230 rocked with each movement, the diesel engines straining as the sub attempted a slight turn, trying to evade what felt like an impossible assault from above. Werner's face was a mask of tension and disbelief. "They think a balloon can kill us," he muttered to himself, though deep down he felt a prickle of fear, a recognition that the war was shifting in ways the U-boat arm could no longer control. Grills banked slightly, dodging the staccato bursts, feeling each shockwave of flak pass under the hull of K-74. The airship's engine strained, moaning under the effort, but the crew's determination never wavered. Grill's eyes darted to the sighting scopes, then to the depth charge release panel. 7 charges, arranged in the precise pattern calculated to smash the hull of a surfaced U-boat, waited. He could almost hear the counting in his mind. 1, 2, 3. Below, Werner barked another order. "Prepare to dive. Schnell, schnell." The crew moved with frantic precision, hatches slamming shut, the conning tower hatch sealing with a resonant clank. U-230's engines roared as the sub attempted a crash dive, but the timing was already slipping against them. Every second counted. Grills felt the sweat on his brow, the vibration of K-74 beneath him, and then made the move. He eased the blimp forward, aligning perfectly with the course of the sub, and released the 7-charge pattern. They fell through the shimmering Florida sunlight like meteors, each one spinning toward its target with lethal inevitability. The sea erupted around U-230 as the first charges detonated, churning water and throwing spray high into the air. The shock waves rippled through the hull, violent and unrelenting. Werner was thrown off balance on the bridge, gripping the rail as the sub shuddered violently. "Damage report," he shouted, voice strained over the clamor of the crew. Alarms blared below, lights flashing red as systems failed under the impact. Diesel fumes mixed with seawater as the sub listed slightly to starboard, groaning under the assault. The crew fought to maintain control, each man understanding the dire gravity of the moment. Grills banked K-74 away from the worst of the flak, eyes narrowing on U-230 as the remaining depth charges fell with mechanical precision. The war, which had once seemed distant to Werner from the safety of his conning tower, had arrived in a way that could not be ignored. The predator above the waves was not a myth, not a relic. It was real, and it was deadly. The blasts from the depth charges rocked U-230 like a giant hammer striking steel. Water erupted in geysers around the sub, hissing and boiling as metal screamed under the pressure. Werner was thrown to the deck, scraping his shoulder against the railing. The sub groaned, the hull flexing in ways that made every seasoned sailor aboard flinch. Instruments swung wildly, dials spinning, needles snapping into dangerous zones.
"Control room, report!" Werner shouted, voice cracking over the chaos. The muffled replies from below were grim. Electrical failures, minor flooding in the forward compartments, and damaged ballast controls. The sub was limping, but still afloat. Each man knew the survival odds had plummeted in the space of a few terrifying seconds. Werner's mind raced. They had survived Atlantic storms, torpedo attacks, and Allied convoys, but air power, this slow, lumbering blimp, was something entirely different. On the bridge, Werner's eyes scanned the sky trying to locate K-74. The blimp had pulled up and banked sharply, disappearing momentarily behind a bank of clouds, but the knowledge that it could return at any moment was a suffocating weight. He turned to his first officer. "Prepare to crash dive fully. We make it to 30 meters fast." Orders barked, crew scrambling to comply. The diesel engines roared, propellers churning water as the sub fought the sea, fighting time itself.
Meanwhile, above, Lieutenant Grills and his crew were already assessing the impact. The flak had been heavier than anticipated, each burst sending shivers through K-74's airframe, but the depth charges had hit perfectly. Water erupted in columns around the sub, steam and foam blotting the horizon, each detonation an unmistakable message. The Wolfpack was no longer untouchable. Grills allowed himself a brief, taut smile. The pattern had worked. U-230 was crippled, and the balance of power was visibly shifting. Back on the sub, Werner's crew fought panic and injury alike. Men shouted over alarms, some straining to seal compromised compartments, while others tried to stabilize the vessel as water began creeping in through damaged hatches. Werner's face, usually impassive under fire, was now taut, muscles tight, eyes burning with the realization that the Atlantic predator they had once dominated was evolving. Air cover, the invisible threat they had once dismissed, had become tangible, deadly, and insurmountable. The sub lurched violently as the final depth charge struck. The hull shuttered, metallic groans reverberating through the entire vessel. Instruments shattered under the shockwaves. Werner felt the first icy fingers of real fear. They were still on the surface, still exposed, and the blimp could return at any moment. "Dive! Now!" he screamed. Crewmen jumped to action, pulling levers, turning wheels, sealing hatches, each movement desperate yet precise. The sub began to tilt, bow dipping into the rising swells. In the air, Grills circled warily, scanning for further flak. He knew U-230 was wounded, but still dangerous. Anti-aircraft guns could still bring the blimp down if he misjudged. The sky above the Florida Straits was suddenly a theater of tension, the sunlight reflecting off the waves like scattered shards of glass, illuminating the peril below. Grills's fingers hovered over the control panel, ready to release another pattern if necessary, yet aware that every second of hesitation could mean the difference between success and disaster. Werner gritted his teeth, gripping the conning tower as the sub listed dangerously. Crewmen called out flooding zones, trying to counteract the imbalance with rapid adjustments to ballast. The diesel engines strained, the propellers biting into the water as the sub finally began to sink beneath the surface. Water closed over the deck in a frothy rush, masking the blimp above from immediate view. For a fleeting moment, silence fell, an eerie pause after chaos, where only the sub's creaking hull and the bubbling of seawater could be heard. And in that brief suspended instant, Werner realized something fundamental. The rules had changed. The ocean no longer offered sanctuary. The war above the waves, once a distant threat, had arrived in full force. Air cover had become the hand of fate, capable of striking down even the most seasoned commanders. Black May was not just a number in a report. It was a warning, a lesson written in fire, water, and steel. The bow of U-230 plunged beneath the waves, sending a roar of water cascading over the deck. Werner clung to the conning tower hatch as the sub settled into a precarious trim, engines straining against the sudden turbulence. Crewmen fought to maintain control, each action precise but desperate, a ballet of survival choreographed against the unforgiving Atlantic. Below decks, alarms screamed incessantly. Flooding compartments hissed as pressure built, and men worked frantically to seal the breaches. The metallic groan of the hull echoed ominously through the sub, each sound a chilling reminder of the thin line between life and death. Werner's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet commanding. "Stabilize ballast. Check forward compartments. We are not going down today." Above, K-74 circled cautiously, shadowing the crippled sub. Lieutenant Grill's face was pale under the glare of the sun, sweat streaking down his temples. He watched the water churn where the last depth charges had detonated, noting the subtle tilt of the sub as it attempted to dive. Grills knew the U-boat could still fire anti-aircraft rounds, and one lucky burst could bring the blimp down in flames. Every maneuver had to be calculated, precise. One wrong move, and the predator became prey. Werner felt the vibrations through the hull as he attempted the emergency dive. He barked orders over the shouting crew. "Seal the hatches, engines full ahead, dive angle 30 degrees. The sub shuddered violently under the strain, water sluicing across the bridge as it slipped beneath the surface. His heart pounded in his chest, every beat a drum of survival. The ocean, once their domain, now seemed like a living thing, reacting to every miscalculation with lethal precision. K-74 remained above, a slow but menacing guardian. Grill's eyes narrowed as he gauged the sub's response. The water had swallowed U-230's deck, but the turbulence betrayed the wounded vessel's movements. He adjusted altitude and angle, careful to remain just outside the reach of the sub's anti-aircraft guns. Fingers on the release lever, he weighed the decision: fire another pattern or allow U-230 a chance to escape. The rules of engagement had shifted. The hunter had the advantage, but precision and patience would decide the outcome. Inside the sub, Werner and his crew worked with grim efficiency. Flooding was partially contained, and ballast adjustments stabilized the dive. But the damage was extensive, and every creak and shudder of the hull reminded them that survival was uncertain. Werner's mind raced with calculations. How long could they remain submerged? How much damage could the sub sustain before the next depth charge or patrol caught them? Each thought was a step on a razor's edge. The tension above and below converged as K-74 hovered, almost spectral, over the Florida Straits. Grills felt the weight of the moment, knowing that the lives of the U-boat crew and his own men rested on seconds and inches. He nudged the blimp into a slow orbit, waiting for the optimal moment to strike again if necessary. The war, which had once seemed distant to Werner, had arrived with a thunderous clarity. Air power had the upper hand, and the age of the surface predator was over. Werner's hands tightened on the conning tower rail as he watched the murky surface above, water frothing and hissing. He realized that even if they survived this encounter, the ocean itself was no longer enough. The Allies had perfected a strategy that combined patience, technology, and relentless pressure from the skies. The days of unchallenged dominance beneath the waves were gone.
Slowly, painstakingly, U-230 managed to reach a depth where the blimp's eyes could no longer track them, slipping into the shadowed currents. The immediate threat had passed, but Werner and his crew knew the lesson was seared into memory. The ocean was no longer their sanctuary. It was a battlefield, now shared with eyes in the sky, floating killers that could strike with lethal precision at any moment. U-230's crew exhaled collectively, though tension still knotted their muscles. The immediate danger had passed, but the taste of survival was bitter, tempered by the knowledge of how narrowly they had escaped. Werner leaned against the conning tower hatch, staring through the murky water above. The sun reflected off the waves in a harsh glare, mocking the ordeal they had just endured. He realized with a sinking certainty that the war had changed in ways they could no longer deny. May 1943 came to be known in Kriegsmarine circles as Black May. 41 U-boats had been lost in just a single month. The wolf packs that had once roamed the Atlantic with impunity were being systematically hunted, strangled by air cover, radar, and the relentless coordination of Allied naval and air forces. U-230 had survived by luck, skill, and timing, but the writing was on the wall. The tide had turned. Werner's mind replayed the encounter endlessly. The Blimp, dismissed by him as a harmless nuisance at first, had demonstrated a terrifying efficiency. The slow, lumbering airship, once considered vulnerable, had become an instrument of destruction. He had seen the hand of technological evolution, of combined arms, render the once dominant U-boat nearly obsolete. He knew other commanders were experiencing the same grim realization. The Atlantic was no longer theirs to control. Below decks, the crew repaired damage with grim determination. Systems were restored where possible, hull breaches patched temporarily, and morale clung by a thread. Werner moved among them, his presence a steadying force, despite his own shaken confidence. He addressed his officers quietly, yet with authority. This is the new reality. We must adapt, or we will be destroyed. Remember what happened today. Remember Black May. Far above, K-74 had returned to base, engines whining as it navigated the currents of wind back toward friendly territory. Lieutenant Grills, exhausted but resolute, filed his report with the satisfaction of a hunter who had struck a decisive blow. The Blimp's crew had proven the principle that air power could dominate the surface even against an enemy long feared and respected. Every calculated drop, every maneuver through flak, had been a statement. The Allies now ruled the skies above the Atlantic, and with them, the fate of the sea itself. Werner stared out over the undulating waves, the Florida Straits glinting with deceptive calm. He could still see the lingering ripples of the depth charge's impact, a reminder that the ocean was no longer an ally, but a battlefield shared with a new kind of hunter. He realized that from this moment forward, the Kriegsmarine's tactics, the very essence of the U-boat war, would have to change, or risk annihilation. The psychological impact of encounters like the one with K-74 could not be overstated. Commanders who had once been fearless now faced an invisible predator in the sky, a reminder that survival depended on adaptation as much as skill. The war, already global in scope, had moved into a new phase, one where the skies were as dangerous as the waters below, and where a single blimp could alter the fate of a seasoned captain and his crew. As U-230 limped toward deeper waters, Werner allowed himself a grim smile. They had survived, but he knew the reality. The dominance of the U-boat arm, the terror of the wolf pack, had met its match. Black May had proven it. Air cover, previously underestimated, had reshaped the battlefield, and for captains like Werner, the lesson was clear. The war was no longer just about steel and torpedoes. It was about who controlled the skies above the Atlantic, and the day K-74 dropped its depth charges would live in infamy as the moment they realized the war was, for the first time, truly lost.